Before the stars of Hollywood's golden age, a young Tony Curtis came on the scene and won over many fans with his blue eyes and good looks. Soon, many fans realized that Curtis was more than just a pretty face. He was also a talented actor whose career lasted 6 decades and earned him a spot in the More Than 100 Films Club. To many fans, Curtis was the sweetheart who grew up to be an icon, but most of his devoted fans didn't know about his truly terrifying dark side. You can probably relate to 23-year-old Curtis because he didn't know what California or this new adventure would do to him when he moved to Hollywood in 1948, but he knew, like many others, that he had to leave poverty and the bad life he was born into. Curtis was the son of Jewish immigrants from Hungary. His parents were poor tailors who only spoke Hungarian and lived at the back of the shop after each hard day's work. On top of that, Curtis's parents had a lot of family problems. Mom was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, and as if that wasn't the worst thing that could happen to the family, Curtis's youngest brother Robert was locked up with the same mental illness. Things only got worse for this family. Curtis had to put off going to school because he couldn't understand English. By the time he was 8, he and his brother Julius were sent to an orphanage for a month because their parents couldn't afford to feed them. 4 years later, Curtis lost his brother Julius in an accident. When Curtis was hit and killed by a truck, he gave up all hope, was left to fend for himself, and joined a neighborhood gang whose main crimes were skipping school and stealing. This was his life, and it looked like there was no hope until a neighbor took a chance on the hurt kid and sent him to a Boy Scout camp where he could use his anger and energy in a more constructive way. Thankfully, this move and change of environment worked wonders by the time. Curtis was more settled after camp, which meant he could go to high school and get the basic education that would give him a fighting chance at life. But school did more than teach him, it also gave him the chance to start acting. When he was 16, Curtis got his first small acting job. He was cast as an idiot in a settlement house drama. He took it so seriously that he shaved his head for the part and did everything he could to keep his head warm while he waited for 3 hours. He worked out for hours to get on stage. That's how dedicated he was to acting, and that was enough for the stage to fall in love with him. But before he could start a career, Curtis joined the Navy and served in World War II on a submarine. When the war was over, he was honorably discharged, and you can guess the first thing he did when he got back was happily start acting again. His first show was Curtis's Only Hope, and he didn't know how to start a career in the business. He did everything the comedian whom he met in the Navy asked him to do and pretty much became his servant in the hopes that the comedian, who was his only link to Hollywood, could teach him some acting and maybe even put him in touch with the right people. The acting lessons didn't go well. The comedian was said to have told Curtis that he wasn't good at acting at all. After the failed home lessons, Curtis started taking acting lessons in New York at the New School for Social Research, where some of his teachers, former high school classmates, were also starting classes. It was while Curtis was in acting college that Joyce Selnick, a famous talent agent, casting director, and niece of film producer David O. Selnick, discovered him. Even though she believed in him, Curtis didn't think he would be successful in Hollywood, possibly because even the college he had graduated from didn't think he was good enough. He said, "I was 1,000,000 to 1 shot the least likely to succeed. I wasn't low man on the totem." He even said, "At first I was only interested in girls and money, but it was clear that Curtis's biggest fear was having to go back to the Bronx as a failure and into the poverty that had torn his family apart." So when he had to choose between going back to the Bronx or acting, even when people told him he wasn't good enough, he kept acting in anything that came his way. He had to play roles that put him behind the scenes of. Background on stage pulling ropes, or when he finally got on stage, playing roles speaking languages he didn't understand. For him, it was better than going home. When he couldn't find work, he went to 20th Century Fox and applied for the role of Tarzan. The people there saw him and told him to grow 8 inches before coming back. Talk about savage. Finally, Curtis got another acting job with an off-Broadway group performing some of George Bernard Shaw's work. It was his persistence that paid off in the end. Speaking about his abilities caught the attention of an aspiring theatrical agent who set up a meeting between Curtis and the head of Eastern operations for Universal International Pictures. The meeting went well enough to land Curtis his first stock contract with a movie company, and before anyone could blink, Curtis was given a suit and a plane ticket to Hollywood. Surprisingly, on the flight to California, he met Jack Warner by chance, which didn't help him at the time, but looking back, some might say it was a sign that Curtis was destined for greatness, but before he could become great, he had to let go of some parts of himself. For example, his birth name, Bernard Schwarz, made it clear that he was Jewish. Curtis also had to deal with the problems of not having an easy-to-remember American name. Now that he was on the verge of a meaningful career in Hollywood, his birth name was one of the things he had to let go of. When the director of his first movie told him about the name change, Curtis chose Anthony Adivi. But the director quickly reminded him that someone else in the business was already known by that name, so Curtis had to settle for Anthony Curtis. As Anthony Curtis, he started out in Hollywood with just one mattress in his apartment and ate milk and pie every day. What could he do? He was only making $43 a week, and money wasn't his only problem. He was taken advantage of and mistreated because he was young and innocent. He wasn't being stupid or foolish, he was just eager to learn as much as possible. Because a part of him kept telling him he wasn't good enough, and you might say, well, at least he was pretty. Curtis would tell you, where I came from, being pretty was like getting a passport out of a trash can. At Universal, there were 15 guys who looked just as good as me, all waiting for me to break a leg. Hollywood was the great equalizer for him, and even though he had a terrible start to his life, he felt like he had a place among many others whose stories touched him. Had no excuses. At some point, Curtis almost quit Hollywood and was about to do the one thing he swore he would never do: go back to the Bronx. He was waiting for the first eastbound train at Union Station when a studio press agent found him and spent time convincing Curtis not to give up on his dream. This is an instance Curtis would be very thankful for. After going back to work, his next 3 movies had him speak less and less dialogue, but something else was happening. He was getting more. He remembered, I was a big star in movie magazines, but I couldn't get arrested in pictures. They even had contests to win Tony Curtis for a week. All of a sudden, I was the winner. And when we got there, she told me she really wanted the gas burner. All of these efforts paid off when his 5th movie exploded during the premiere. The cast was greeted with cheers as they walked on stage for the parade, but the mood changed when Curtis, who was the last person to go on stage. The movie magazine girls in the audience were used to seeing Curtis on glossy pages and couldn't believe they were finally seeing him in real life. They let their excitement be known by stomping their feet and yelling as loudly as they could. They almost turned the meet and greet into a riot. Curtis said it was like walking into an open furnace. The cast and studio were shocked, and who could blame them? Curtis was pretty much unknown and hadn't gotten much screen time to talk. His appearance in the magazine was actually the studio's way of making money, because he wasn't making any money from acting at the time. When he was almost surrounded by fans, they quickly recovered from their shock and started looking for Curtis a show where he could be the star, which they did right away. The movie The Prince Who Was a Thief was the perfect way to start because it showed Curtis in all his masculine glory and wasn't about romance. Too complicated of a plot to confuse the fans they were making it for. Curtis got his first private dressing room right away. His movie cost about $200,000 to make and made about $2 million because of how popular he was. The studio couldn't believe they had found the fountain of wealth after looking for it for so long without realizing it. As soon as they saw the pots of gold coming in, they rushed to make the sequel to Curtis's movie, which also did very well at the box office. People loved seeing Curtis on screen, and over the next few years he was in a lot of successful movies that solidified his status as one of the rising stars of his time. We use the term rising star because Curtis then signed with Universal, Hollywood's most powerful talent agency. This was the sign that Hollywood finally saw him as a star, but after 7 years with Universal, Curtis and his team decided that there was another opportunity. The likes of Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, and James Dean were the big stars of Hollywood, and Curtis's team thought he could rub shoulders with them too. They set out to find movies where these big stars could star and still have room for Curtis, and their hard work paid off over the next few years. Curtis starred with the big stars and had the best roles in different movies with them. He said, "The big movie stars took the pressure off of me. I had the best roles, the fellows knew it." But they didn't mind because they knew the kids liked me, which was a smart move that paid off as Curtis got his own big movie, The Defiant Ones, and was nominated for an Academy Award for his performance. That same year, he made Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe, who was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time. The movie was a huge hit, so what did you expect? What did you really expect for Curtis? His career peaked when he starred in. After Operation Petticoat, he went back to the Navy as a veteran and a famous movie star. Curtis was in comedies, dramas, war movies, you name it. He was very versatile and loved his job. He never won an Oscar, but he did get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and was inducted in 1960. He also received the Ordre des Arts des Lettres from France. With all of his success, Curtis boldly said, "Today I'm adjusted as a man and a star, but in a way I'm still doing what I did when I was 7. Looking in the gutter for money, but now it's not the gutter and it's not money, it's just looking." If those words made you feel sad, you're not alone, and you'll soon understand why. As Curtis became more famous, he fell in love with actress Janet Leigh. This was in the early days of his fame, which he had gained because girls loved him. At the time, the studio knew how the movie business worked and knew that Curtis's relationship with any woman getting out would pretty much end his rise to fame. He later moved to Cape Cod to live with his family. He later toured in a musical version of Some Like It Hot and made his last movie, David and Fatima, in 2008. However, by this time, his health was becoming a regular issue. He had a heart bypass surgery in 1994 and was still fighting obstructive pulmonary disease. He almost died of pneumonia in 2006 and was in a coma for a long time. In 2010, Tony Curtis, aged 85, passed away from cardiac arrest in Las Vegas on September 29th. His wife gave many fans peace of mind by saying, "He died peacefully here surrounded by those who love him and have been caring for him. Tony's only dream was to be a movie star." He didn't want to be the most dramatic actor. He wanted to be a movie star since he was a little kid. That little kid, even though he had a lot of bad things happen to him early in life, held on to his dream, the only light he had, with all his might, and was pulled out of the darkness. Fans can only be thankful for how strong that boy is.